guys, welcome to Kidmissing TV. I am so sorry that this video didn't go out yesterday like it was supposed to. I had a lot going on. And I was busy. My new dresser came in and I had to assemble it, and it was a long day. So, this video is one of my exposés. It will not be a poster, obviously. Monday's video, there wasn't a poster, but there was a picture. This one won't have anything because there really isn't anything. Like I said, it's one of my exposés. This is about the untreated syphilis experiment in Tuskegee, Alabama, which you might recognize as the home of the Tuskegee Airmen, an elite force of airmen made up entirely of African American soldiers. The study was conducted between 1932 and 1972. 40 years. When they first started the experiment, there was a treatment that was almost worse than the disease. It worked, but it was pretty horrible. So they didn't use it, but their goal was not to treat. It was never to treat. Their goal was to watch the progression of the disease until death, then autopsy the dead. That is horrific. First off, they did not and they used the Tuskegee Institute, which had been, it's now a historically black college. And it was started by Booker T. Washington, I believe. Or was it? That might not be right. Anyway, someone in his same time period. And interestingly, there were 399 men in the study. Um, 399 men had syphilis, and 201 were the control group who did not have the disease. And they did not have informed consent at all. There is actually a movie about this called Miss Evers' Boys. Because Miss Evers was the nurse, and they recruited a black nurse so the men would trust her. They thought they were being treated for what they called bad blood, which could be any number of illnesses. These were sharecroppers. Basically, sharecropping was the descendant of slavery, basically. The difference was they lived in a little home on the property with their family. They took care of the farmer's land or the plantation owner's land, and he gave him a little piece of land to grow his own food on. That's what a sharecropper is. Like I said, it's the descendant of slavery. Although they did have white sharecroppers. They were very poor people. Um, Also, in 1945, penicillin was discovered. Well, it was discovered a little before that, but it came out in 1945, but wasn't readily available to the public until 1947, at which point these men could have been cured in a second. During World War II, this little study had a problem, and that is that these men wanted to serve. So they concocted a scheme to make sure that these men did not find out they had syphilis and get cured. Because, of course, one of the tests that they do is for venereal diseases or sexually transmitted diseases, and they treat you. And they decided that the men that didn't have syphilis to start with, that were in the control group, who contracted it during the study, could go into the military and be treated, but not the ones who had it to start with. Lovely. Now, there was a settlement much later on. And the reason, well, let me back up a little bit. The reason for this study was to see its progression in the Negro male. Even though they knew there was no difference between the progression in a Negro male and a Caucasian male. And in the process of this study, their wives got the disease, their children were born with congenital syphilis, which causes deformities and issues. This is what happened to Al Capone. He lived in a time before they treated it. He had it for gosh knows how many years, because it can sit there for a lot of years without you even knowing it. And he gave it to his wife. His son was born with it. In fact, Al Capone died from syphilis of the brain. So it's one of the most awful STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, that you can get if not treated. And the thing about it is, there aren't a lot of symptoms. You can get what's called a chancre of syphilis, which is a really gross looking sore that Doesn't hurt. It goes away in less than a week, and you forget about it. I mean, today people who are active get tested more frequently. Nobody thought about those things back then. They weren't educated in those things, black or white. It didn't matter. It didn't stop until a reporter saw one of the write-ups in the journals and did some digging and exposed the study. And the government said, holy beep, we better shut this down. We've been found out. And in 1974, there was an out-of-court settlement with the government for $10 million. It was divided into 4 categories. Living syphilitic group patients received $37,500. Heirs of deceased syphilitic group patients received $15,000. Living control group patients received $16,000. Heirs of deceased control group patients received $5,002. That's a weird number. There was a 50th anniversary event, which was held in November 30th, 2022, to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of the experiment. So, yeah, that's... And, okay. Science had been racist all along. In fact, scientific racism was used to justify the African slave trade. Scientists argued that African men were uniquely fit for enslavement due to their physical strength and simple minds. They argued that slaves possessed primitive nervous systems, so they did not experience pain as white people did. Enslaved African Americans in the South were claimed to suffer from mental illness at rates lower than their free northern counterparts, thereby proving that enslavement was good for them. Oh my God. And slaves who ran away were said to be suffering from their own mental illness known as drapetomania. Oh my gosh. And during and after the Civil War, African Americans were argued to be a different species from white Americans. And children of mixed race were presumed to be prone to many medical issues. And some very uneducated doctors said that the emancipation of slaves had caused the mental, moral, and physical deterioration of the black population. Observing that virtually free of disease as slaves, they were now overwhelmed by it. And they said they would go extinct and that their physiology wasn't good for the colder climates of the United States, so they should be sent back to Africa. Well, you never should have brought them here as slaves to begin with, but And this all matters because, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this one. Scientific and medical authorities of the late 19th and early 20th centuries held extremely harmful pseudoscientific ideas, specifically about the sex drives and genitals of African Americans. It was widely believed that while the brains of African Americans were under-evolved, oh, give me a freaking break, their genitals were overdeveloped. Black men were seen to have an intrinsic perversion for white women. Oh my goodness. And all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral with insatiable sexual appetites. Are you freaking kidding me right now? Are people really that ignorant? Wow. With these understandings of race, sexuality, and health, researchers undertook the Tuskegee study. Because they believed that they were more prone to diseases like syphilis, STIs, sexually transmitted infections, and their low birth weights and high miscarriage rates were universally blamed on STIs. Unbelievable. And they didn't believe black people would get treatment for syphilis, regardless of their education. Well, first of all, most black people during that time period were afraid of doctors. And it didn't matter what they had, they didn't want to get treated. Because they were afraid of what might happen to them. Now, bad blood was a term encompassing anemia, syphilis, fatigue, and other conditions. Yeah, there was a medicine that had arsenic in it. That was the only treatment for syphilis back in those days. In 1947, the government opened rapid treatment centers specifically to treat syphilis with penicillin, and these men still weren't treated. They said that these men were too stoic to visit a doctor, even though some of them somehow managed to get treatment. And I say somehow because these ignorant fools convinced the doctors in the area to not treat these men. The last infected person or family member who was infected that they were paying for the medical care of, thanks to the NAACP. And if you don't know what that is, that's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And like I said, in 2009, the last surviving person that the government was forced to treat passed away. I was looking for a tissue. Yep, it was leaked to a reporter, and there were, okay, this is the statistic at the end of the study. 28 participants had perished from syphilis. 100 more had passed away from related complications. At least 40 spouses had been diagnosed with it, and the disease had been passed on to 19 children at birth. The following year, Congress had hearings on what happened. And the $10 million was given out in 1974. Now, do you think this is the only time we did such a gruesome thing? No, it's not, actually. In Guatemala, from 1946 to 1948, we did the same thing, only worse. Doctors purposefully infected 1,300 people, including 600 soldiers and people from various impoverished groups. Sex workers, orphans, inmates of mental hospitals, and prisoners with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid, I'm not sure what that is, without the informed consent of the subjects. Only 700 of them received treatment. In total, 5,500 people were involved in all research experiments, of whom 83 died by the end of 1953. They also did this to children in state-run schools down there, orphanage. Ugh. In 2010, on October 1st, the President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services finally apologized to the country of Guatemala. It was actually a woman, Susan Mokatoff Reverby of Wellesley College, which is a high-end women's college, uncovered information about the Guatemala experiments in 2005 while researching the Tuskegee syphilis study. She shared her findings with the U.S. government. Francis Collins, who ran the National Institutes of Health at the time of the revelations, called the experiment a dark chapter in the history of medicine. Okay, arsophenamine. It was the arsenic-based drug that they used. Good Lord. The prison experiment was supposed to happen in a prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, but they had a hard time infecting prisoners. Excuse me? I mean, it goes on and on and on. You know how they gave it to him? Okay. Warning. um, Even though it officially ended in 1948, doctors were still taking samples and doing autopsies until 1958. So 10 years. This is how they were given the syphilis, okay? Through visits by the doctors that were permitted by the prison. Presumably, the prison's mental hospitals and orphanages were being paid for this. With infectious female sex workers, which, as I understand it, did not work very well in the prison, which is why they moved on to the other more vulnerable populations, because the prisoners weren't stupid. Paid for by funds from the US government. Other attempts at passing the pathogens to participants included pouring the bacteria onto various lightly abraded body parts, such as male subjects' genitalia, forearms, and faces. Some subjects were even infected through forced perforation of the spine. Participants who then tested positive were treated with penicillin. However, there is no evidence for adequate treatment having been provided to all subjects or whether infected individuals were actually cured. What the beep? The prisoners refused to have their blood drawn. And they, for whatever reason, just didn't get infected. They would just collect it from like prostitutes and whatever off the street and pour it onto patients in Guatemala. How did we get permission to do this to the people of another sovereign nation? First of all, in 1997, President Clinton apologized formally. There were several of the men from the study in attendance. I actually saw this live. My mother and I watched it together. It was so exciting. Oh, for crying out loud. I'm sorry. What you've been hearing is my text notification, which I've been ignoring because it's probably nothing. Looking for a tissue. Anyway. So yeah. Excuse me. I have other exposés that I'm going to do because these are crimes against human beings. Therefore, I feel that they fit the channel. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I need to go blow my nose. Shut up. It's not coming up on my watch, which tells me it's junk. And I will see you, well, tomorrow for a No Friday. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.